I always thought Christmas morning would be filled with laughter, cinnamon-scented warmth, and the clinking of mugs filled with hot cocoa. Instead, it became the day I realized my family didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a resource. It started when we all gathered in the living room, the tree blinking weakly in the corner, casting colorful lights over the carefully wrapped gifts. My sister, Lisa, was lounging on the couch in her new designer boots, scrolling through her phone with a lazy thumb. My dad, looking unusually tense, kept glancing at me like he was gearing up for something. I sat quietly on the armchair, my fingers wrapped around a mug, savoring the one moment of peace before the inevitable chaos of family chatter. But then Dad cleared his throat. The room fell into an unnatural silence. Mom shifted uncomfortably. Lisa didn't even look up. Dad said my name sharply, and I set my mug down, heart already starting to race without knowing why. "We need to talk," he said, voice low but loaded with a pressure that immediately made my chest tighten. "About what?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. He didn't ease into it. There were no pleasantries, no careful build-up. "We need you to sell your car." The words hit me harder than I expected. I blinked at him, stunned. "What?" "For Lisa," he continued, gesturing toward her like she was some fragile creature in desperate need. "She's gotten herself into a bit of financial trouble. Medical bills, credit cards, rent." "That's not my problem," I interrupted before I could stop myself. My voice came out sharper than intended, slicing through the heavy air. Dad's jaw tightened. His knuckles whitened where he gripped the arm of the couch. "Family helps family," he said through gritted teeth. I laughed. I actually laughed, and it sounded strange and hollow in the suffocating room. "Family helps family," I echoed. "But only when it's me footing the bill, right? When Lisa wrecked her last car, who paid for the repairs? When she needed tuition, who co-signed the loan she defaulted on? When she maxed out her credit cards twice, who bailed her out?" Mom shushed me sharply, glancing nervously at the windows like the neighbors might hear. Lisa, finally deigning to look up, rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath about me being dramatic. I stood up. My mug tipped over, splashing cocoa onto the carpet. No one even flinched. "I'm not selling my car," I said, voice steady despite the rage crawling up my spine. "That's my only transportation. It's my way to get to work, to live independently. I paid for it myself, without any help." Dad's face turned an alarming shade of red. He stood too, and before I could step back, he lunged at me, hands grabbing for my pockets, my jacket, trying to reach my car keys. For one frozen second, I thought he was going to hit me. Instinct kicked in. I shoved him away, harder than I intended. He stumbled back, knocking into the coffee table. The Christmas tree wobbled dangerously behind him. Everyone gasped like I was the aggressor. Like I had committed some great sin. "Get out," Dad barked, voice hoarse with fury. "Get out until you're ready to do the right thing." I stared at him. At Mom, who wouldn't meet my eyes. At Lisa, who was back to scrolling like none of this mattered. And for the first time in my life, I realized something. They didn't see me. Not really. Not as someone with dreams, with needs, with boundaries. I was just a tool. A safety net. A bank account that could guilt trip into opening. I reached into my jacket, pulled out my car keys, and held them tightly in my fist. "No," I said quietly. "You're the ones who need to think about what the right thing actually is." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house. The bitter winter air slapped my face, but it felt cleaner than the suffocating atmosphere I had just left behind. My breath formed small clouds in front of me as I crossed the driveway to my car, and slid behind the wheel. For a long moment, I just sat there. My heart was hammering. My hands were trembling. But not from fear. From clarity. I wasn't just walking away from a fight. I was walking away from an old version of myself, the one who bent over backward to win love that was always conditional. The one who thought being useful would make me worthy. Not anymore. I turned the ignition. The engine rumbled to life, steady and strong beneath me. I gripped the steering wheel and stared out at the snowy street, feeling something shift deep inside. It wasn't just Christmas morning anymore. It was my first real day of freedom. And they would soon realize, I wasn't going to be the family's scapegoat ever again. Driving away from the house that morning was supposed to feel final, like slamming a door shut on years of manipulation and guilt. But freedom doesn't come wrapped in a neat bow. It comes in slow, painful waves, like thawing from frostbite, numbness giving way to aching, then burning, then healing. At first, I didn't answer their calls. I couldn't. My phone buzzed nonstop, texts from Mom pleading with me to be reasonable. Voicemails from Dad thick with anger, messages from Lisa flipping between guilt-tripping and outright insults. For 2 days, I stayed locked in my apartment, blinds drawn, phone on silent, nursing the emotional whiplash. Then, on the third day, an envelope arrived. No return address. I opened it cautiously, heart thudding. Inside was a letter, written in my mother's delicate, looping script. Family means sacrifice. It's time you learn that. No explanation. No apology. Just that one line. I stared at it, rereading the words until they blurred together. Family means sacrifice. I crumpled the letter into a tight ball and threw it into the trash, but it didn't matter. The phrase had already wound its way into my mind, repeating over and over like a cruel mantra. Family means sacrifice. What they really meant was, you sacrifice. We take. I realized then that walking away physically wasn't enough. I needed to untangle myself mentally and emotionally too. So I did what I should have done years ago. I started keeping receipts. Not literal ones, though heaven knew there were enough of those. No, I sat down and made a list. Every loan I had co-signed for Lisa. Every time I had covered a small emergency, that turned into thousands of dollars. Every birthday I spent alone because Lisa needed extra attention after one of her latest disasters. Every holiday where my accomplishments were ignored because Lisa's drama took center stage. The list was brutal. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking from anger, grief, and the sheer weight of it all. They had trained me to believe that love was transactional, that my worth was tied directly to what I could give, and that if I ever said no, I was selfish, cruel, ungrateful. But now I saw the truth. They didn't want a family. They wanted a donor. I started making plans. Quietly, carefully. I began saving every spare penny. I worked overtime whenever I could, skipped unnecessary expenses, lived like I was still a broke college student. Because I knew, if I wanted real freedom, I needed more than distance. I needed independence. Meanwhile, the pressure from my family didn't let up. Mom showed up at my work once, crying dramatically in the lobby until my boss had to escort her out. Lisa posted vague, passive-aggressive rants on social media about fake siblings and heartless relatives, tagging me by accident, or maybe on purpose. Dad sent one final text that simply read, "You owe us." I laughed when I saw it. Actually laughed. A year ago, that message would have sent me spiraling, desperate to prove my love and loyalty. Now, it just confirmed what I already knew. I didn't owe them anything. Weeks turned into months. The silence between us became a canyon too wide to cross. At first it hurt, a deep, gnawing loneliness that settled in my bones. But over time, the pain faded, replaced by something steadier, quieter peace. Still, they weren't done. One evening, after a long shift, I found a certified letter taped to my apartment door. A notice from a lawyer. My parents were threatening to sue me for emotional damages caused by neglecting familial duties. It was absurd. Laughable, even. But it also chilled me to my core. This wasn't just guilt-tripping anymore. They were escalating. They were willing to drag me through mud and courtrooms to force compliance. I sat on the floor of my living room, letter trembling in my hand, and realized they would never stop. As long as I had something they wanted, money, stability, a spine, they would keep clawing at me. Unless I made it impossible. I reached out to a friend of a friend, a quiet, competent attorney who specialized in family estrangement cases. We met in a dim coffee shop where she listened patiently to my story, nodding at all the right moments. When I finished, she leaned forward and said, "You have the right to live your life. You're not legally obligated to sacrifice your future for them. Let's make sure they understand that." Over the next few weeks, she helped me put safeguards in place. Power of attorney revoked. Emergency contacts updated. Bank accounts protected. Social media accounts scrubbed of any links they could use. I even filed a cease and desist letter, warning them that any further harassment would result in legal consequences. It felt brutal, cold, final, but necessary. The day I mailed that letter, I drove to a quiet overlook outside the city. The sky was heavy with stars, the kind of sky that made you feel small but also infinite. I sat on the hood of my car, and let the cold air clear my mind. I thought about the sacrifices they demanded. Sell your car. Give up your savings. Move back home and pay Lisa's debts. Sacrifice your dreams. And for what? Temporary gratitude. Hollow praise. More demands? No. They said family meant sacrifice. I said not my future. Not anymore. I looked up at the stars, felt the solid, familiar weight of my car beneath me, and made a promise to myself. I would build a life where love wasn't conditional, where giving wasn't mandatory, where I wasn't a pawn in someone else's game. And for the first time in my life, I truly believed I could do it. I slid off the hood, climbed back into the car, and drove away, not out of fear or guilt, but with the quiet certainty of someone who knows exactly where they're going. toward a future they didn't get to control, toward a future that was finally, blessedly, mine. I used to believe that if I kept my head down, worked hard, and stayed silent, life would eventually reward me. That loyalty and sacrifice would be seen, appreciated. That the people who loved me would always act in my best interest, even if it wasn't immediately obvious. It was a lie. A sweet, comfortable lie I clung to for far too long. The lawsuit threat had been a final straw, but it wasn't the last play they tried. After I sent the cease and desist letter, after my lawyer made it clear that any further harassment would have legal consequences, they shifted tactics. They went public. Posts started popping up on Facebook, Instagram, even in the small-town community forums where neighbors swapped pie recipes and shared photos of their grandkids. Long, dramatic posts from my mother about how some children forget who raised them. And betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family. Photos of Lisa, tearfully holding a stack of overdue bills, captioned with, "When family refuses to help in your darkest hour." Even Dad weighed in, with grainy photos of our house from years ago, talking about how we gave everything, only to be repaid with cruelty. They never mentioned my name directly, but they didn't have to. The small-town grapevine didn't need much fertilizer to grow. People I'd known since kindergarten started sending me cold texts, distant comments like, "Hope you're doing okay. Your parents must be so heartbroken." I got tagged in posts about the importance of honoring thy father and mother. At work, a coworker pulled me aside and gently asked if I needed financial help. I didn't explain. Not to anyone. Let them believe whatever version of the story made them feel good about themselves. I had already learned that trying to justify myself to people who wanted me to be the villain was like trying to empty the ocean with a thimble. But privately, I was seething. They wanted to corner me, isolate me, force me to come crawling back out of shame and loneliness. They didn't realize I had spent my entire life learning to survive in the corner. And this time, I wasn't staying there. I started building my own road the same way you build anything that matters, slow, brick by brick, cut hand by cut hand. First, I doubled down on my independence. I took a second job, freelance work, small contracts here and there. I lived leaner than I ever had before. No dinners out, no vacations, no impulse buys. Every spare cent went into savings. Second, I moved. Quietly, without fanfare. I found a modest but clean apartment 2 cities over, under a new lease, tied to a P.O. box instead of my real address. I changed my phone number. I updated every account with 2-step authentication. I cut off mutual acquaintances, not out of spite but out of necessity. If they couldn't find me, they couldn't hurt me. But it wasn't enough to just run. I needed to run towards something. So I started dreaming again. Dreams I had buried under years of obligation and guilt. Dreams I had let wither because there was always something more important. Someone else's emergency, someone else's disaster. I dusted off my old business plans, the ones I had written in college before life had dragged me under. I enrolled in online classes, learned about entrepreneurship, marketing, finance. At night, while others slept, I mapped out my future with a hunger that scared me a little. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about finally choosing myself. Meanwhile, their lives were unraveling. Without me as a financial crutch, Lisa's debts caught up with her fast. Her car got repossessed. Her landlord filed for eviction. The private lenders, those smiling predators with contracts full of fine print, started showing up at my parents' house, demanding payments they couldn't make. The proud, pristine facade they had clung to for so long began to crack. I watched it all from a distance, detached. Not gloating. Not rejoicing. Just relieved. Because for the first time, their problems weren't my problems. They tried to bait me, of course. Messages sipped through occasionally, new numbers, burner emails. Stories about how Lisa's health is failing, Dad's heart isn't what it used to be, Mom cries every night. I didn't answer. I didn't even open most of them. Because I knew, if I gave them an inch, they would take the mile. If I cracked, even once, they would wedge themselves back into my life like rot through the foundation. No. I had built this new road too carefully to let it be washed away by guilt. A year later, almost to the day of that disastrous Christmas morning, I officially launched my own business. It was small at first, tiny, really, but it was mine. My name on the paperwork. My sweat in the contracts. My dreams, no longer sacrificed on someone else's altar. I sent out the first newsletter to my small but growing client list. And then, because closure matters even when you think it doesn't, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. I drove out to the edge of town, to the old overlook where I had once sat on the hood of my car and promised myself a better life. The car was still mine, beaten up, a little rusty, but running like a stubborn, loyal heart. The same way I had kept running, even when everything tried to break me. I sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges, and thought about the road behind me. The betrayals, the loneliness, the pain, all of it had been real. All of it had been brutal, but none of it had been wasted, because it had built me. Brick by bloody brick, it had forged something stronger than blind loyalty or desperate hope. It had forged a woman who knew her worth. A woman who could walk away from manipulation without looking back. A woman who could build her own road, no matter how many people tried to block her path. Later that night, as I sat at my tiny kitchen table, reviewing invoices and updating my modest financial spreadsheet, my phone buzzed. A new number. No voicemail. Just a text. Please, just talk to us. It's Christmas. I stared at it for a long time. A year ago, I would have cried. A year ago, I would have doubted myself. Now I simply deleted it without replying. Not out of cruelty. Out of necessity. Family, real family, doesn't demand you set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Real family doesn't love you only when you're convenient. Real family doesn't corner you into sacrificing everything you are just to buy their approval. They tried to corner me. They tried to trap me in a life of endless debt, emotional, financial, spiritual. They tried to mold me into something pliant, obedient, broken. But they failed. Because when they built a cage, I didn't just look for the door. I built a whole new road. One they can't find. One they can't block. One they can't follow. And for the first time in my life, I'm not running away from them. I'm running toward myself. Toward a life I chose. Toward a future that belongs to me, and only me. And as I sit here, in my tiny apartment, sipping lukewarm coffee and dreaming bigger dreams than I ever dared before, I realize that's the best kind of road there is. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after a storm, a silence so complete, it feels almost wrong. Like your ears are still ringing, waiting for the next clap of thunder. That's how it felt in the months that followed. At first, I didn't trust it. I kept waiting for the next blow, the next desperate reach, the next guilt-laced plea disguised as concern. But slowly, as winter melted into spring and spring bled into summer, the calls stopped. The emails went silent. The social media posts faded into oblivion, replaced by new gossip, fresher scandals. They moved on. Or maybe they just ran out of ways to reach me. It didn't matter. I wasn't the same person anymore. The one who used to sit by the phone, praying for an apology that never came, a validation that was never offered. That person was long gone, left behind like an old skin I had outgrown. I was someone else now. Someone free. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't crash in like a wave. It creeps in on quiet feet. You notice it in the little things first, waking up in the morning without a pit in your stomach. Spending your own money on your own dreams without the nagging guilt. Driving your car, down open roads with the windows down and the music blaring, knowing that every mile is yours alone. There were nights when doubt tried to creep back in. Lonely nights when the weight of being truly on my own felt too heavy to bear. Times when the voice of that old programming whispered in the back of my mind, maybe you're the bad one. Maybe you should have forgiven more, been more, given more. But those voices were faint now. They didn't command me anymore. I had built a life too sturdy to be shaken by ghosts. Business was slow at first, but steady. I poured myself into it, not because I was trying to prove anything to anyone, but because I had finally found something that felt real. I loved every exhausting, exhilarating second of it, the late nights, the endless planning, the small victories no one else noticed. Every client I landed felt like planting a flag on my own little patch of the world. Every invoice paid felt like a middle finger to the people who said I'd never make it without them. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. But I was mine. And that was worth more than anything they had ever offered. One evening, about a year and a half after I walked away, I found myself on a familiar road, purely by accident. I had taken a wrong turn after a client meeting in a nearby city, and before I knew it, the landmark started looking unsettlingly familiar. The gas station where I used to fill up late at night, the diner where Mom always insisted we meet for family dinners, that ended in lectures. Then the street. Their street. The old family house stood there, still the same dull brown with the sagging porch and the cracked driveway. But it was different, too. Weeds choked the front yard. The paint peeled in long, lazy strips. A for sale sign, battered and leaning, stood like a surrendered flag on the lawn. They were gone. Gone from the house that once felt like a prison with lace curtains. Gone from the neighborhood that used to feel so claustrophobic, where everyone knew everyone else's business and judged accordingly. I sat there in my car, engine idling, watching the empty windows for a long time. Waiting for what? Regret? Longing? But all I felt was relief. And maybe a little sadness, not for what had been lost, but for what had never truly been there in the first place. I thought about getting out, taking one last look, maybe walking up to the porch for closure. But then I smiled, shook my head, and shifted the car into gear. Closure wasn't found in haunted houses and broken memories. Closure was the life I was driving toward, not the ruins I was leaving behind. The road stretched out before me, endless and open. I thought about all the versions of myself I had been. The scared kid desperate for approval. The dutiful sibling always fixing other people's messes. The silent daughter who swallowed her hurt to keep the peace. All of them had a hand on the wheel once. But not anymore. Now, it was just me. And the woman I had fought so hard to become. The woman who understood that love without respect isn't love at all. The woman who knew that family isn't determined by blood, it's determined by choice, by actions, by who shows up for you when it matters. And sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself is choose to walk away. Or drive. Far, far away. Later that night, as I sat on the balcony of my small apartment, sipping coffee and watching the city lights blink like scattered stars, I allowed myself to imagine the future. Not the future they had tried to script for me, dutiful daughter, selfless provider, and the sacrifice. No. My future. One where I built things that mattered. One where I loved people who loved me back without conditions. One where I woke up every morning knowing I belonged to myself, first and foremost. They had tried to break me. Tried to grind me down into something easier to control, easier to use. But instead, they had unknowingly given me the greatest gift. The freedom to define myself. On my terms. Without apology. Without fear. Without them. A few days later, I treated myself to something I had long dreamed about, a road trip. Just me, my car, a few playlists, and an open map. No destination. No obligations. Just freedom. I drove through sleepy towns and sprawling fields, through mountain passes and dusty highways where the sunsets looked like something torn straight from a dream. And everywhere I went, I carried the quiet, steady knowledge that I had built this life. Mile by mile. Choice by choice. Refusal by hard-fought refusal. Every no I had ever said. Every boundary I had ever enforced. Every time I chose peace over guilt. It all added up to this. This life. This freedom. This future they couldn't touch. Sometimes I still think about them. Not often. Not with bitterness. More like someone thinking about an old scar, a reminder of pain survived, lessons learned the hard way. I hope they found whatever they were looking for. I hope Lisa found her footing, or at least learned how to live with her own consequences. I hope my parents found peace, or at least understanding. But whether they did or didn't, it's not my burden to carry anymore. I laid it down a long time ago. As the miles stretched out behind me and the horizon beckoned forward, I realized something profound. Healing isn't loud either. It's not fireworks and grand declarations. It's quiet mornings in a safe place. It's answering to no one but yourself. It's living a life so true to who you are that the opinions of those who tried to break you don't even echo anymore. They tried to break me. But I didn't just survive. I didn't just rebuild. I transcended. I became someone so far removed from their reach, so untouched by the grasp, that they wouldn't even recognize me if they tried. And honestly, that's the happiest ending I could ever imagine. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are the ones that no one else sees. They happen behind closed doors, in quiet moments of decision, when we choose, against every instinct drilled into us, to stand up for ourselves. They are the moments when we refuse to set ourselves on fire to keep others warm, even when those others are the people who are supposed to love us most. One of the most powerful lessons I learned is that loyalty without respect is not loyalty at all. It is servitude disguised as love. When people demand sacrifice after sacrifice without ever offering understanding, appreciation, or true care in return, what they are asking for is not family, it's control. And love based on control is not love worth keeping. For a long time, I believed that family was unconditional. That no matter how much it hurt, no matter how much it drained me, I owed them my loyalty. I thought that by giving more, forgiving more, bending more, I could somehow earn their approval, their love, their acceptance. But life taught me otherwise. True family, whether they share your blood or not, doesn't love you because of what you can give them. They love you regardless. They cheer for your victories, not just their benefits. They comfort you in your losses without keeping score. They don't measure your worth by your usefulness. They see you as a person, not a resource. Walking away wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of survival. I learned that protecting your peace sometimes means disappointing others. It means being called selfish by people who benefited from your selflessness. It means enduring being misunderstood, judged, even vilified. But at the end of the day, you have to live with yourself, not with their opinion of you. And no opinion is worth sacrificing your freedom, your dignity, your dreams. Another crucial lesson was about the power of silence. I used to think every attack demanded a defense, every accusation needed a rebuttal. But sometimes silence is the strongest statement you can make. Walking away without drama, without explanations, without giving them the reaction they crave, it's an act of profound power. It says, "You no longer have the power to hurt me." I choose peace over proving my side of the story. Building a new life wasn't easy. It was slow, painful, often lonely. There were nights when I questioned everything, when the old guilt gnawed at my resolve, whispering that maybe I was the villain they painted me to be. But every morning I woke up in the place I chose, living a life I built. The voice of guilt grew quieter, and the voice of self-respect grew louder. I also learned the importance of boundaries, not as punishments for others, but as necessities for my own well-being. Saying no is not an act of hostility, it's an act of self-care. Refusing to enable toxic behavior is not betrayal, it's loyalty to yourself. Boundaries are the architecture of a healthy life. Without them, you are a house with no walls, open to every storm, every intrusion, every demand. Most importantly, I realized that healing is not about becoming untouched by pain. It's about choosing to move forward even when the scars still ache. It's about building a life so beautiful, so grounded in authenticity and self-love, that the pain becomes just one chapter in a much larger, richer story. Pain will visit. Betrayal will sting. Loss will leave its mark. But none of those things define you. Your choices do. Your resilience does. Your refusal to settle for less than you deserve does. I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to grow, even if they share your bloodline. Sometimes the greatest act of love is the love you show yourself, or no one else will. Forgiveness came eventually, not for them, but for myself. For the years I spent trying to be good enough for people who would never see me clearly. For the times I mistook endurance for loyalty, silence for peace, sacrifice for love. Forgiveness doesn't mean reopening the door to those who hurt you. It means closing it firmly without anger, knowing that your worth was never up for negotiation. It means choosing to move forward without dragging the weight of resentment behind you. It means building a life so full, so vibrant, so fiercely your own that there's no room left for bitterness. And so I drive on, down roads they can't find, into futures they can't touch. I live not in spite of them, but beyond them. And every mile I put between who I was and who I am now is a testament to the simple, powerful truth I carry in my bones. I am enough. I am free. And I owe no one the pieces of myself they tried to break.